In my last life, I died beneath the conservatory glass of the Ashbourne estate. Celine Ashbourne, the girl who had worn my name for 17 years, had reached for my wrist with tears in her eyes and poison in her smile. Our mother slapped me before I could speak. Our father turned away, and my brother Adrian arrived only in time to hear the sound of the glass breaking. When I opened my eyes again, I was not bleeding on
marble.
I was in the tiny room above Mr. Reed's bicycle repair shop, the summer heat pressing against the window, my school uniform still damp from the sinkware. I had washed grease from my sleeves. On the table lay a cheap prepaid phone, and on the screen was a missed call from a number marked police. Liaison office. The date was wrong by exactly 23 days. In 23 days, the Ashbournes would come to confirm. A second DNA report. In 24, Celine would arrange a kitchen accident at the copy shop where I worked evenings, expecting me to fight like I had in my previous life and look unworthy the moment my wealthy parents saw me. The phone rang again before I could breathe through the shock. A calm female voice introduced herself as an officer from District 1 and said a family wished to request a final kinship test. I stared at the cracked wall, then answered with a steady voice I had not possessed even as a dying girl. Yes, I said, I would cooperate, but I would choose the time and place. That night, another call came, this one from an overseas
number I knew by heart.
I answered before the first. Vibration ended. On the other end, silence crackled. Then Adrian's voice broke in a whisper.
Alina, he asked.
Did you die under the West Conservatory window too? I sat down so hard the chair nearly collapsed beneath me. Adrian flew back the next morning, abandoning a summer term in Zurich and arriving in Meridian in the wrinkled clothes he had slept in on the plane. The moment he saw me outside the repair shop, he did not ask for proof. He only gripped my shoulders and said, "This time you do not explain, and I do not arrive late. This time we make them look at what they chose not to see." We sat in the back room with ledgers, old newspapers, and the memory of 2 ruined lives between us. In the life we had lost, Celine had not only stolen affection, she had siphoned money from the Ashbourne Scholarship Trust, fed private family information to a gossip account, and used my temper as a stage on which she could always perform innocence. Adrian had found pieces of it too late and died in a crash after his brakes failed on the coastal road. So we made rules. Rule 1, never fight her on emotion, because she swam in emotion the way sharks swam in
blood.
Rule 2, let evidence move first. Rule 3, if one of us had to choose between the family name and the other sibling, we would choose each other every single time. Adrian wrote the rules on the back of a shipping invoice and folded it into my palm. Like a vow, the copy shop attack came on schedule, but we met it prepared. Adrian had persuaded Mr. Reed to replace the broken quarter camera 2 days earlier, and I had moved the industrial foam canister closer to the print room door when 2 hired boys shoved their way inside with their faces half covered and a bottle of solvent in hand. I did not grab scissors and lunge like last time. I slammed the alarm, emptied white foam across the floor, and let their own momentum send them skidding into the metal racks. By the time the Ashbournes reached the shop with 2 officers and a private investigator, the room looked like a snowstorm had exploded indoors. I stood in the doorway coughing, my throat raw from chemical smoke. My palms scraped, my clothes streaked white. The boys were pinned under fallen poster tubes and shrieking that the floor was cursed. I looked nothing like a feral girl with a weapon. I looked like a 17-year-old who had been cornered at work and still chosen not to harm anyone. Mother saw the welt on my neck and went pale. Father asked the investigator 3 times whether I needed a hospital before he seemed to remember how to say my name. Celine was not there. She had sent her condolences by message first. A flawless little line that read, "I'm sorry my sister had to meet this family in fear." Adrian, reading over Father's shoulder, laughed without humor and saved a screenshot before anyone could delete it. At the hospital, the doctor said my vocal cords had been irritated by fumes and overstraining. He recommended a few quiet days, little speaking, warm water, and rest. Adrian looked at me, and I looked back, and together we decided to keep the silence longer than necessary. In my last life, every explanation had been twisted into defiance. This time, while my throat healed, I would answer with written sentences precise enough to leave no room for anyone else's script. The Ashbourne estate looked exactly as I remembered. Silver fountains, trimmed black hedges, and a house so wide it seemed built to magnify loneliness. When I entered with a small overnight bag and a notepad in my hand, Celine stood at the foot of the staircase in a cream dress with pearls at her throat. She rushed forward with wet eyes and open arms, every inch the beloved daughter welcoming home a lost sister. I stepped back before she could touch me and wrote on the notepad, still coughing, "I do not want to make you sick." For the first time in either life, her smile flickered. It was only a heartbeat, but our father saw it. "Mother," however, did not. She went to Celine at once, adjusting the girl's bracelet, saying softly that no one was blaming her and she need not feel threatened. I turned another page and wrote, she should not feel threatened. I'm not here to take anyone's room. I only want my exam registration transferred from the district school on time. Father's face tightened at that. Adrian took the note from my hand and read it aloud to the room. When he finished, the silence felt heavier than accusation. Mother cried. Father looked ashamed. Celine lowered her lashes and whispered that she only wanted me to feel included. Included? Adrian repeated. Then perhaps stopped speaking as, if Elena is a storm passing through your home, she belongs to the truth whether any of you are comfortable or not. That evening, Father asked what I wanted beyond the school transfer. He clearly expected jewelry, tutors, or a suite of newly bought things. I wrote 3 lines. First, keep Mr. and Mrs. Reed's repair shop lease from being raised this year. Second, let me sit in on the scholarship office records because I plan to apply for engineering and need practice in administrative systems. Third, do not redecorate my room on someone else's taste. I would rather choose blank walls than borrowed ones. Celine laughed softly, almost fondly, and said I was practical in a very charming way. But Father's eyes sharpened at the words scholarship office records. In the previous life, no one had let me near the family foundation until after the damage was done. This time, I had asked on my first day, and Father, perhaps because he was a businessman before he was a sentimental parent, approved immediately. He thought work might calm me. He had no idea it would become the knife that opened the rot beneath his own roof. I transferred to St. Orion Academy 1 week later. The uniform was expensive, the classrooms overcooled, and the students polished in the way children became when they had never been forced to earn their own bus fare. Celine entered beside me with 4 girls in tow and a face full of sisterly concern. She introduced me as Elena, newly found, shy, and still adjusting. She did not say poor. She did not need to. Everyone's eyes lingered on the old canvas backpack I had insisted on keeping. My first week at St. Orion gave Celine an opening she thought too easy to miss. She arranged for one of her teacher's aides to accidentally seat me beside a boy notorious for cheating and then made certain 2 prefects passed by during the quiz. I answered every problem without once glancing sideways. Handed in first and then wrote on my notepad before the class, please also check his sleeve and the underside of his desk. The cheat sheet they found there belonged to him. The prefects apologized to me. The boy never spoke to Celine again. At lunch the same day, a group of girls cornered me with soft smiles and cruel curiosity. Was it true? One asked that I had been discovered because I looked so much like Mother in profile. Another asked whether people from repair shops always learned to eat this quietly. I uncapped my pen and wrote on a napkin, I learned silence from rooms where no one wanted the wrong daughter to be louder than the right. Litly. I placed the napkin between their trays and walked away. By afternoon, half the grade was repeating the line, and none of them knew whether I had meant Celine or the family. Adrian spent his days pretending to be aimless while doing the most precise work of anyone I knew. He had miniature cameras placed not only in common corridors, but in the scholarship office, the archive hall, and the side entrance used by delivery staff. He cultivated the gardeners, the drivers, and Father's old housekeeper with the same patient respect he had once reserved for professors. Information travels fastest through the people the rich learn not to see. He told me, Celine has always counted on invisibility that belongs to others. One Sunday, Father came to the reed shop with 2 boxes of imported fruit and the strained posture of a man walking onto sacred ground with dirty shoes. Mr. Reed accepted neither the fruit nor the apology immediately. He only handed Father a rag and pointed at a bicycle chain. If you want to stand in my doorway looking sorry, he said, at least make yourself useful. Father spent 40 minutes learning how grease seeps under the fingernails no matter how careful one is. He left with the fruit still in his back seat, and I think the first honest humility he had felt in years. Mrs. Reed was less patient. She told Mother plainly that grief did not absolve negligence, and that discovering a child was yours after 17 years did not entitle you to perform heartbreak while still demanding convenience. Mother accepted the scolding in stunned silence. Later, she asked me whether Mrs. Reed had always been that
Fierce.
I wrote, only where love is involved.
Mother.
Read the sentence twice and then folded it into her purse instead of throwing it away. Because I spoke as little as possible, people filled the silence for me. Some decided I was proud. Some thought I was traumatized in a romantic, breakable way. A few boys in the back row called me the ghost heiress, until Adrian heard them once after practice and invited them to repeat it in front of him. They never did. Celine denied open cruelty, tried subtler methods. A textbook vanished from my desk and turned up in my locker. An anonymous account posted that I had stolen another girl's presentation slides. Each time, Adrian already had footage, timestamps, and a witness. The first public crack in Celine's image came from something trivial, a silver fountain pen. She left it on my desk before lunch and returned with 2 classmates to accuse me of taking it. In my last life, I would have emptied my bag on the floor in fury. This time, I simply handed the girls my locker key and a slip of paper on which I had written, check the west hallway camera at 12:13. Then check Celine's right sleeve. The pen was taped there with clear skin tape. The girls stared. Celine cried, but they had already seen enough. By October, I was ranked 2nd in the grade in physics and 4th overall. My quiet made teachers mistake me for meekness until they read my solutions. Mr. Armand from the robotics lab began leaving advanced circuit kits in my locker with no note at all, as if talent were simply something one should feed. The scholarship office was even better, hidden among invoices for literacy grants and district. Math camps were repeated payments to shell media firms, with almost identical descriptions and wildly inflated costs. Celine next tried benevolence as sabotage. She launched a campus charity club supposedly for underfunded district schools and invited me publicly to serve as technical coordinator because I was good. With practical things, Adrian nearly laughed himself. Sick. We accepted. Within a week, I had traced the club's donor page to the same media vendor already draining the foundation. I quietly redirected the club's promised equipment order to a verified public supplier and attached receipts to every student mailbox on campus. Celine arrived at the next meeting ready to bask in praise and found herself facing questions from every
direction.
Mother attempted private reconciliation around then. She invited me to tea in the morning room, where the porcelain was so thin one could almost see light through it. She asked what foods I preferred, whether I had childhood photos, whether I remembered my first fever. The questions were maternal in shape and hopelessly late in timing. I answered 3, then closed the notebook and looked at her until she understood the problem on her own. She
Whispered, I'm asking for lost years as if they were.
anecdotes. I nodded.
She cried.
I did not. Adrian was gentler with me than with anyone else, but gentleness did not make him soft.
One rain-heavy night.
He confessed the detail from our previous life he hated. Most, the brake line on his car had been cut with a tool from the estate maintenance room, he said, and the last message on his phone before the crash had been from Celine asking whether he had finally found the proof he wanted. I'm not sure she meant to kill me, he admitted. I am sure she meant to keep me driving in the dark. We sat with that for a long time while thunder moved above the glass house roof. Not all battles were large enough for police or trustees. Some were quiet humiliations Celine had once used to erode me by inches. A ruined hem before assembly. Ink spilled across a draft report. A tutor suddenly canceling at the last minute because a family misunderstanding made the arrangement complicated. Adrian and I answered each one methodically. Spare dress in my locker. Scanned copies of every report. Tutors booked through contracts, not sentiment. Every time she reached for small chaos, she found a wall already built. I think that frustrated her more than any public defeat. Adrian and I built our case at night in his room, surrounded by copied receipts and old family calendars. We found that the same vendor had been paid by the foundation, by Mother's Charity Luncheon Committee, and by Celine's so-called student initiative. We found ghost volunteers, duplicated hotel bills, and one unforgettable invoice for a healing retreat that had happened on the same weekend Celine claimed to be visiting an orphanage. The pictures from that orphanage trip had been posted by a media intern 3 months later. Adrian wanted to confront father immediately. I refused. Truth dropped too early would only drive the family into defense. We needed Celine to make one more choice, publicly and irreversibly, and we needed the choice to be hers. So instead, I entered the city engineering challenge with a low-cost water purification design and let the school newsletter publish my interview.
I knew Celine would.
Hate the applause most when it came from somewhere she could not control. She answered with sweetness, sharpened into strategy. She delivered homemade soup to my study hall after learning from a maid that my throat still hurt on cold mornings. She praised my project in front of teachers. She began calling me Lena in public, the kind of nickname that sounded intimate enough to imply history and ownership. The school loved it. What a touching reunion, they said. Look how hard Celine is trying. Adrian watched all of this with the patient expression of a man waiting for rot to soften the fruit from within. The trap revealed itself at the Founders Day Lake dinner. Celine told half the school that I had finally agreed to sing in the small charity program because my voice had healed. Then she arranged for the sound team to cue a recording from my old district school where I had once shouted at a football referee, clipped carefully to make me seem violent and crude. At the exact moment she expected the recording to play, I was not near the stage. I was in the staff cabin with 2 trustees from the foundation, helping them compare budget sheets Adrian had delivered that afternoon. When the recording blared through the speakers, the whole lawn went still. Then, over it, a second audio feed cut in. Adrian's voice, calm and almost bored, said, "If you are hearing track B, it means someone manually replaced the approved program from this console at 1912. Thank you to St. Orion's security system for keeping an exact log." The sound booth lights snapped on. Celine's best friend Mara Lynn stood there with the USB drive still in her hand. Celine's face drained white under the lanterns. Mother fainted. Father did not. Father looked first at the booth, then at me, then at Celine, and something cold and sober entered his expression. It was not love. It was the beginning of accounting. By midnight, the story had spread through every parent group in Meridian. Celine locked herself in her room and sobbed until Mother, already spiraling, sat outside the door with a blanket for 2 hours. Adrian and I returned to our evidence folders. He said quietly, "We are close." I answered by handing him The receipt trail for the media vendor. The next morning, Father asked to see everything.
Not.
Just the security log from the dinner, not just the foundation invoices, but all of it. Adrian took him to the library and laid out months of copied records across the long table like a surgeon, arranging instruments. I was there too, with my notebook. And when Father reached the invoice for the healing retreat, I wrote only one sentence. You asked why I wanted blank walls? Because use things. Keep other people's fingerprints. Numbers do too. Father read until noon. Mother came in twice, both times. Furious that we were attacking Celine during a period of emotional instability, Father did not even lift his head. On the third visit, he pushed one sheet toward her, without a word. It was an internal transfer authorization carrying Celine's digital signature for a payment to a company, registered in the name of her biological aunt, the same aunt who had vanished after the maternity ward switch. Mother's lips trembled, but disbelief was becoming
Harder to stage even for herself.
Celine's answer was not repentance. It was escalation. 2 days later, the battery compartment of my purifier prototype was tampered with before the regional engineering final. The failure would have caused a visible short and a shower of sparks on stage, just enough to ruin my project and leave suspicion of unsafe work on my name. Adrian had anticipated something like it from a detail. He remembered from our last life, so he had photographed every wire before check-in. The tampered pack was discovered under the table beside Celine's duffel bag. She smiled when the officials found it. Smiled. Then she burst into tears so sudden and violent that a volunteer actually stepped forward to comfort her. I had seen that performance too many times to feel anything at all. Adrian did the explaining for me. He did not raise his voice. He simply projected the before and after wiring photos onto the venue screen, enlarged the fingerprint testing on the casing, and asked the judges whether anyone wished to discuss coincidence in front of the local education board and the 2 reporters already seated in the second row. No one did. My project won first place by technical score. The papers the next morning ran my photograph, beside headlines about young innovation, and included, in smaller but deadly print, a note that an attempted sabotage of the same event was under review. Celine was not named directly. She hated that worst of all because people knew anyway, and uncertainty lets rumor breed 1,000 teeth. The house changed after that. Servants stopped updating. Celine, on who had entered and left, Father's secretary, began reporting directly to Adrian on foundation
Matters.
Mother still hovered around Celine's door at night, but in daylight she kept searching my face, as if hunting for the child she had failed somewhere inside the girl I had become without her. I let her look. I did not help her. In my last life, I had begged for tiny scraps of fairness. In this one, I saved my breath for exams and circuit diagrams. St. Orion held winter oral examinations in December. And because my throat had fully healed by then, teachers pressed for me to return to normal participation. The first time I answered a question aloud in advanced physics, the room went silent for reasons that had nothing to do with the content. My voice was lower than people expected, firmer too. After class, one of the boys who had once called me the ghost Harris said, almost sheepishly, "You sound like you do not need saving at all." I told him, "No one ever
Did.
I only needed witnesses who could count correctly." Around New Year, Mother finally entered the scholarship
Office alone.
She stood amid filing cabinets and donation ledgers while I balanced a stack of corrected applications. She asked whether I truly meant to keep the bursary work after graduation instead of taking a ceremonial place in the company. I answered that companies protect families. Scholarships alter maps. She repeated the line under her breath like a student, preparing to memorize it, and said perhaps she had spent too much of her life thinking legacy meant walls and signatures instead of doors. Celine heard about that conversation before sunset. Of course. She cornered me in the cloak hall and hissed that I was turning Mother against her one pious sentence at a time. I wrote back on my notepad, "You had 17 years and still thought tears were a permanent strategy." She slapped the notebook out of my hand. A passing maid saw it and gasped. Celine burst into tears before the notebook even hit the floor. It might have worked once. By then, the maid only bent to hand me my pen. There were moments when the future itself seemed to wobble under the weight of changed choices. In the life we had lost, Adrian and I had never shared ordinary things, late noodles, exam jokes, arguments over playlists in the car. This time, those things became the proof that survival is not made only of climaxes and escapes. Once, at 2 in the morning, he made instant noodles so badly that even I refused a second bite. He looked offended and said, "I crossed continents and one death to save you, and this is the gratitude I get." I told him cross back and learn to cook. Adrian and I had one sanctuary, the glass house on the east side, half abandoned since grandmother's orchids died. On quiet nights, we sat among dust-covered pots and compared the life we had lost to the one opening under our feet. He admitted he still woke from dreams of the coastal guardrail folding beneath his car. I admitted I still flinched at footsteps behind me on stairs. He said, "When this is over, do not let them buy your forgiveness with security." I answered, "When this is over, do not let them make you her by guilt." We are not returning to a burning house, just because it is large. In November, the maternity ward nurse resurfaced. Not because conscience suddenly found her, but because the district prosecutor's office raided the media vendor and stumbled onto older financial ledgers tied to an account that had once transferred money to her husband. Faced with prison, she confessed that Celine's biological mother had paid to switch the infant bracelets after hearing that the Ashburn baby was healthy and the other newborn had no known wealthy relatives. The confession landed on father's desk at 7:40 p.m. He did not come out of his study until morning. Celine tried a different weapon then. She swallowed a harmless amount of sedatives, just enough to frighten Mother and pull the house back into orbit around her bed. When the doctor confirmed it was not life-threatening, Mother wept with relief and clutched Celine's hand as if that erased receipts, signatures, and sabotage. Father stood at the foot of the bed reading the medicine label and finally said in a voice flat as,
Stone, you calculated the dosage.
Mother stared at him, as though he had struck her. Celine turned her face to the wall and kept crying. After that, Father asked legal counsel whether the adoption could be formally dissolved now that criminal fraud at birth was established. The answer was yes, but
Messy.
Mother refused at first. Adrian said nothing during that meeting until the attorney mentioned potential liability if Celine remained a controlling beneficiary of the trust. Then Adrian looked at Mother and said, if your love requires the rest of us to be collateral, at least call it by its proper name. It is not kindness, it is
Preference.
Mother slapped him. The sound cracked across the breakfast room like a snapped branch. I rose before I realized I had moved and took Adrian's hand. Father told Mother to leave the room. She did, shaking and furious, but not before looking at me with an old reflexive accusation that had once been enough to make me shrink. I did not shrink. I only wrote on the back of a receipt, you always strike the child who stays. Then I placed the receipt beside her teacup where she would see it later. December brought the annual Aurora Gala, the single most important social event on the Ashbourne calendar. In my previous life, it had been the night Celine framed me for stealing a diamond brooch, and Father publicly announced that I needed treatment for aggression. This time, Adrian convinced Father to use the gala for something else, a full audit presentation to the board, combined with the public launch of a transparent scholarship platform. Father agreed because reputation was bleeding and transparency could be sold as reform. Celine appeared that evening in silver silk as if she still owned the house. Mother had not helped her dress, and that absence clung to the girl's shoulders more visibly than any missing necklace. She approached me near the staircase while the quartet played and said, you think you won because your brother came back for you. When he leaves, they will still prefer the girl who knows how to stay soft. I looked at her, then looked past her to the mirrored column where Adrian's hidden camera pin reflected both our faces. At last I spoke aloud for the first time in
Weeks.
record that too, I said. Celine froze. Her own reflection showed her what I meant. The camera, the open ballroom, the trustees near. Enough to turn if she raised her voice. Mine also showed something else. I no longer looked like prey, not even the quiet kind. She smiled with cracked lips and said nothing. Then she walked toward the ballroom center where Father was, beginning his remarks. I should have expected that. Retreat from Celine was never retreat. It was a change of knife. Father had barely begun presenting the foundation audit when the main screen glitched. For half a second, the new scholarship portal disappeared, replaced by a folder of private hospital records from the year I was born. Then a video opened automatically. It was the old clip from the lake dinner sound booth, but spliced with images of me from the coffee shop attack. Slowed to make my movements seem unstable, dangerous, almost violent. Gasps rippled through the hall. I did not move. Adrian did not either. This too we had prepared for. He walked directly to the AV control rack, unplugged one cable, and projected a second file over the first. On the screen appeared a time-stamped corridor recording. From 10 minutes earlier, it showed Celine entering the tech alcove in her silver dress, using a staff code she should not have had, and inserting her own drive. It then showed her pausing to look straight at the camera before adjusting her expression into tears and gliding back into the ballroom. Her little performance might have worked anywhere else. It failed spectacularly on a night Father had already hired independent digital security. The room changed in a single inhale. People who had pitied her stepped away. Those who had whispered now stared openly. Father did not raise his voice when he addressed security. Escort Miss Celine Ashbourne to the West Study and call her attorney, he said. The fact that he used the name Miss instead of daughter landed harder than shouting could have. Mother half rose from her chair, then sat again, hands clasped so tightly I thought the bones might crack. Celine did not scream. That would have been too plain. She laughed instead, low and bright and terrible. Do you know what happens to houses that worship blood after Raising love? She asked the room. They lose both. Then she turns to me and said, you still think this? And because I looked at one video, Alina built this cage, I only learned how to sing inside it. For one, heartbeat, heartbeat, heartbeats, heartbeat, 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 heartbeat. Then I remembered the broken glass in my throat from another life. The police arrived before dessert, not for sibling rivalry, not for family scandal, but for fraud, misuse of charitable funds, digital sabotage, and conspiracy to intimidate a minor employee at the copy shop. Adrian had sent every documented piece to the prosecutor's office that morning, timed to the gala on purpose so that no amount of private pleading could bury the matter by midnight. Celine stared at him as officers took her statement.
You planned the hour, she whispered.
Adrian answered with brutal calm, last time you planned mine too.
Mother broke then.
Not in Celine's defense, not even. Fully in mine, but under the crushing weight of every place she had chosen tears over truth because tears asked less of her. She began to sob in the middle of the ballroom, one hand over her mouth, and whispered my childhood name from the records, though she had never actually spoken it over my cradle. Alina, Alina, Alina. I watched her from 3 steps away and felt only the slow, strange grief of realizing I had spent years starving for a woman who did not know how to love without first being deceived. The gala ended in fragments. Trustees left in clusters. Reporters outside the gate built a storm before dawn. Adrian and I went to the glass house and sat on overturned clay pots while the house behind us shook with phone calls. Near midnight, Father came out, coatless in the winter air, and asked whether I would still sit the national exam or defer until next year. I said I would sit it. He nodded, then asked whether, after everything I could still call this home. I looked through the broken orchid shelves and answered, honestly, I can call it the place where my brother
Lives.
home is earned. That answer aged him more than the legal notices did, but he took it. Over the next months, he did what he should have done. Much earlier, paid back misused funds from his own accounts, submitted the company to external review, and transferred majority control of the scholarship trust to an independent board chaired not by family but by educators. He offered Adrian early succession. Adrian refused, unless the company charter included protected funding for public engineering programs and complete separation between personal inheritance and charitable assets. Father signed when the prosecutor's team formally requested electronic copies of the foundation ledgers. Father asked me whether turning them over would also expose Mother to public ridicule for signing documents she had not read. I told him yes. I also told him that shielding her again would make me complicit in the same selective blindness that had destroyed us before. Father took off his wedding ring, turned it once between finger and thumb, and said, then, she will have to live through being known. It was the most adult thing I had ever heard him say about love. The press eventually learned enough to swarm our school.
Gates.
St. Orion arranged private entrances for the children it considered worth protecting. I refused special treatment unless the same route remained open for scholarship students whose names were also getting dragged through donor chat groups because of the audit. The headmaster looked startled that I had noticed. Adrian, hearing about it later, said institutions are often shocked when the poor child they intended to rescue insists on widening the door behind her. We widened it anyway. After Celine's arrest, some people expected me to rejoice loudly. Instead, I felt tired in a deep, clean way, like a room after furniture has finally been carried out. Relief is quieter than revenge, Adrian observed. He was right. The grand satisfaction others wanted from me never arrived. What arrived was space to study, to sleep without rehearsing my defense, to walk past mirrors and see a face not defined by who had doubted it. Last, Mother began visiting the Reeds without telling anyone. I learned this when Mrs. Reed casually mentioned that Mother now knew how to patch an inner tube and still could not brew decent tea. Apparently they spent those afternoons speaking not about me, but about practical things, engine oil, winter, cough remedies, whether children should be forced to write apology letters by hand. Perhaps that was the only level on which Mother could begin to learn humility, not as performance, but as task. I did not interfere. Some educations arrived late, and
Still matter.
the board offered Adrian a formal position before he had even finished his deferred term abroad. He declined until his degree was complete, and then countered with a proposal to create a student design fellowship for applicants from public schools and trade programs. Father signed the proposal faster than any acquisition file in recent memory. I suspect part of him understood what Adrian and I both knew. If the family hoped for any future at all, it would not be purchased through image repair. It had to be built in structures that did not depend on our
Forgiveness.
Mother asked to attend one of my robotics demonstrations. In February, I almost refused. Then I remembered the girl I had been, the one who would have watched the gate all afternoon for a glimpse of anyone coming for her. So I said yes and gave her no promise beyond a seat in the back row. She came early, sat quietly, and did not cry when I spoke to judges with a clear, restored voice. She only folded the program into her lap and listened. Later, she left a note on my desk that said, I'm trying to become someone you would not have had to fear. I did not answer for 3 days. Celine's case moved faster than most people expected, because the prosecution preferred financial crimes with neat records to messy family theater. Her biological mother was arrested in another city. Marilyn accepted a plea agreement and surrendered her devices. Several school administrators resigned after. Investigators discovered how often complaints against late students had been softened before reaching the district board. St. Orion pretended shock. Adrian, hearing this, said institutions always acted. Astonished by rot, they had carefully polished until it reflected well. The national exam arrived under clear spring skies. I sat it without any system, without miracle, without the false ladder that had tempted so many students in other stories and destroyed them here by simpler means. Greed, pressure, and the belief that every cost was justified if the destination glittered enough. Adrian waited outside each building gate with coffee, cut fruit, and increasingly ridiculous motivational
Notes.
the one before mathematics read, in case you forget, derivatives are still easier than family. When results came, I ranked third in the province for engineering placement and first among St. Orion's girls in mathematics. Adrian claimed he had predicted this exactly and produced a sheet of calculations as proof. Father hosted no triumphant banquet. Instead, at my request, the Family Foundation funded a new bursary for vocational students, night school, candidates and teenagers working part-time, while preparing for university. We named it after Mrs.
Reed, who cried harder than
Mother did and then demanded to inspect the contract. Herself with reading glasses perched at the end of her
Nose.
The tabloids kept writing regret stories about the Ashbournes for months. The family whose true daughter returned. The false heiress who fell. The heir who rebuilt the trust he would not let his sister inherit as apology. They all missed the point. Regret was never the achievement. Distance was.
Choice.
Was. The morning I left for Meridian Institute of Technology, Adrian loaded my suitcases himself and tucked the old folded shipping invoice with R3 rules into the front pocket. I carried it like a passport. University tasted like metal workshops, late night. Noodles, grant applications, and freedom so ordinary it made me dizzy. I built water systems, then sensors, then a low-cost emergency battery pack designed for rural clinics. Adrian founded an urban restoration lab and spent half his weekends driving school students from outer districts to see campuses they had been taught were not for them. Father donated quietly. Mother volunteered. Even more quietly, we did not become simple.
we became deliberate. On the first anniversary of the Aurora Gala, Mother asked whether she might visit the glass house with me. The orchids had not returned, but Adrian and I had turned the place into a study room with long tables, cheap stools, and tools for scholarship students who came on Saturdays.
Mother looked around and said, "You made something useful. Out of the room where I kept things I did not know how to save." I answered, "No, Adrian and I made something honest out of a room built for display." She accepted the correction with bowed head. Years later, when the city gave me an innovation medal, and journalists asked whether I felt vindicated, I looked toward the front row. Mr. and Mrs. Reed sat there, in borrowed formal clothes, holding hands so tightly, their knuckles shone white.
Adrian sat beside them, grinning like a man who had once fought death simply to keep a promise. The Ashbournes were present too, but not in the seats reserved for family. Vindication, I told the reporters, is when the truth, no longer needs to shout to stay standing. What I did not say on stage was this: in the life we lost, I died believing I had been weighed and found too troublesome, too sharp, too late. In the life we won, I learned that silence could be a weapon, evidence could be mercy, and a brother's belief could be stronger than any bloodline's prejudice.
Celine had wanted a world where one crying face could erase every bruise beneath another girl's sleeves. Adrian and I built the opposite. Not a world without cruelty, but one where cruelty had to survive daylight. It never did very well there.